YouTube channel, and we welcome you to the YouTube channel. You type in the same information. If you're there, you know that you type in the information of WBLS 1075 NYC to access that. A lot of folks can also go to WBLS.com, and they should be able to link up with the stream there also. So we welcome you there. We just had too many issues with Facebook there. But anyway, let me introduce.
So does Zuckerberg.
Oh, yes, he does. But let me introduce the crew, and we are getting rolling here. Let me start. Nither Khan to my right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Brother, I don't say sister. Brother Bobby Childs. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning. And then those of you out there who have found us on YouTube, if you know other viewers who may not have heard that we switched and they're connected to you on Facebook, just give them a nudge and point them in the right direction.
Sounds good. I think we have something on Facebook to point them that way, but that is a good way. Tell someone. Also, we have Achilles Buchanan. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have Brother Protest, Larry Ham.
Good morning. Good morning. And
All right,
happy
Brother Bob.
Malcolm X Day today. And I want to give a shout out to all the brothers and sisters that went on the annual pilgrimage to the grave site today. They left 8 a.m. this morning from New York City. Hundreds of people go to visit the grave of Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz. They're buried together. And I would urge those people who have never been to the grave site of Malcolm to go and visit. And lastly, I just want to say, while we remember that this is the anniversary, Malcolm X would have been 94 years old had he not been assassinated. And what I would really urge people to do, while many people have read the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, which is a good book, I would commend to people to really read what Malcolm X said, because a lot of us say stuff that we said Malcolm said, and he really didn't say that, but you won't know that unless you read. So this is what I would recommend. I recommend that people read Malcolm X Speaks.
That's correct.
That's a selection of his speeches. A book. Now, he gave a speech by the title By Any Means Necessary, but there's a book titled By Any Means Necessary, published by Pathfinder Press, which is also a collection of Malcolm X's speeches. I'd also recommend Malcolm X on Afro-American history. And finally, I'd recommend the final speeches of Malcolm X. Because if you really want to know what Malcolm was thinking, you got to look at what he was saying in the last years of his life, particularly 1964 and the first few months of 1965 when he was assassinated. So let's remember Malcolm. Shout out to December 12th movement, who has asked all the stores on 125th Street to shut down today, I believe from 12 to 4, in honor of Malcolm X. And they've been doing this for a number of years. So shout out and commendations to the December 12th movement here in Harlem, New York.
I'm going to have to save you to last next time so I can introduce my crew first before you give this. Hear ye.
No, but I just think.
Now I want to come back to that. Let me just introduce Bob Pickett. Let me introduce.
All right.
I didn't introduce Bob Pickett.
I'm sorry, Bob.
Yeah.
My apologies,
no problem,
Bob.
brother. No
Attorney
problem.
Bob Pickett is also
the
rounding
quiet
up
one.
my guest slot here. And good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Fatim. How are you, my brother?
Brother Larry, it's interesting
Well,
that you.
before you do that, just so we know we got some of our viewers on there. So hopefully you got the sound. We got the sound right for you. And Edwin Latson, he did confirm the sound is good. He says now if we can only do something about Pickett's hair, we'll be good.
There you go.
That's so
All right.
wrong.
So one of the things I want to say.
that's wrong.
Ed Latson has been with us for the last 20 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Let me just
it.
say this, Brother Larry.
Yes.
And this is a conversation that we really need to have. And I'm going to call Brother Roger Wareham, Attorney Roger Wareham, to see what he has to say on this. Because right now, I've been part of, the process of going down 125th Street. We also extended some time down on Fulton Street in Brooklyn. But I know about 125th Street. But at the end of the day, Harlem is just not Harlem no more.
Right.
And you can go and and then some of the merchants may not want to close and may not even understand.
Yes.
But Harlem has changed, and
Yes.
we have to. I'm not saying that we may need to change this,
Right.
but we have to look at this because we're going into a community that has changed, and Harlem is just not that black Harlem that it once was.
The word is gentrification.
Now, of course, I know what it is.
No,
But,
I'm being
but-
facetious.
right, but what I'm saying is maybe we need to look at something else now. And the younger generation now, they've been doing this for the past 20 plus years
Right.
of doing this. Maybe we need to come up with something else now, not only about closing the stores, but doing something else in the community, especially in the black community, so
Right.
that our young folks, all folks, could come out and participate. That's what I'm just saying.
I agree.
I'd like to give a shout out to all my brothers and sisters who attended Malcolm X Shabazz High School with me early on, both, and I think we talked about it. We changed the name of Southside High School, oh my God, so many years ago. And,
1972.
How many years?
yeah, right.
1972.
3 digits. Huh?
But at least in Newark, we do have an institution that reveres and honors the legacy and memory of Brother Shabazz. I'd also like to add that you brothers and sisters, if you haven't, please read The Ballad and the Bullet, one of the seminal speeches by Brother Malcolm, because it lays out his ideological perspective on the application of black nationalism. So that's a seminal work. So I would agree, reading Malcolm rather than reading other interpretations of Malcolm. But reading Malcolm is essential. So
I've always recommended that. That's why I talked about when it deals with Dr. King. A lot of
Absolutely.
people don't know that he's written numerous books, about 7 books. And what we need to do is give a recommendation time to time on here of books that folks should go out there and
That's a good
purchase
idea.
or
Good idea.
purchase
That's a
and bring
good
on your
idea.
tablet
Right.
at the end of the day. There's a matter of fact.
And I just want to give I don't know, say shout out, but commend my brother sitting next to me. He's too modest. This is the man who, as a 17-year-old, started the petition drive to change the name of Southside High School to Malcolm X Shabazz High School. And you don't think much that's like, but he faced violent threats when he put forward the petition, because it was funny, because when he started the petition drive, I was already on the Board of Education. He was a senior at Southside High School. Everybody was with it. Good student, he's doing something, he's doing his civic thing, he's getting a petition drive. But then he got over 1,000 signatures on the petition. He brought it to the Board of Education, and when I was on the board, I put forward the motion, and the board members voted for it. It wasn't like me, just a majority of the board members voted for it. It became school policy. Once the reality had set in that he had actually gotten the school's name changed, he faced violent threats. Teachers were telling the students that they would not be able to get into a college because they had Malcolm X on their high school diploma. Football players were urged to go and physically attack him because he had gotten the name change. And to this day, there are alumni, and this is serious, it's not like a passing. There are alumni who are active trying to get the school's name changed back.
Today.
Wow.
Today, in the 21st century. So,
crazy.
We kind of gloss over these things. We think it's nice. But he faced physical threats because he thought there should be a school with the name of Malcolm X on. And it's the only high school in the United States of America in Newark, New Jersey that has the name of Malcolm X.
So what was the inspiration and impetus
glad
for you
you
to do
asked.
that?
Thank you, and I appreciate that, brother. Thank you very much.
No, the truth.
But I could not have had the inspiration to do that without the intellectual guidance and political guidance of Amiri Baraka. And I would think you would
Absolutely.
agree, he was our political mentor, our political father. I would not be the person I am were it not for Amiri Baraka. And I can't tell you how important it is to have people like him in your life organically. And so I give praises to Amiri's his political brilliance, his artistic brilliance, and his vision. And as a young Simba Waichunga, a young lion in his organization, that was the impetus for me to change the name of the high school, because according to Malcolm and Amiri, in the black community, institutions should reflect our ethos, our political views. It should represent our history and who we are. And that was the
That's great.
inspiration for me. That was the guidance for me.
I continue to learn every Sunday. I continue to learn from these two.
Same here.
This is, you know what gets me, first of all, let me commend you, my brother, on this. And Brother Larry, both of you brothers over there, I commend you. Bob Pickett, I know you've been in some struggles also in your younger days. But a lot of times we don't even talk about the violence that we face. I might mention, Fatine, he produced Reverend Sharpton, or he was security with Reverend Sharpton. But we had to thump. Had to thump. When I say, you talking about just having threats, we fought people, man. When I say fought, we fought down in the Brooklyn courthouse. We were there on a case, and the court officers wouldn't let the women out to the bathroom.
Yeah, man.
So when they had to go in the garbage can and we had to shield them, they said, no, you wouldn't let them out. We had to fight.
Right.
When Reverend Sharpton got stabbed, when those folks came at us, I thanked the NYPD that day, because we were outnumbered.
Right.
We were outnumbered. So this is real.
Yeah.
When we came out there to Jersey, when we was on that turnpike, brother, that was real.
Yep.
And this is not 1960s, 1950s.
Right.
You talking
remember.
about 90s in the 90s and 2000s, This is a real struggle. And then I just want to say another thing. When Bob Pickett and M2 and myself went over to Darfur, to Africa, and to stand up for those brothers and sisters that were going through changes over there by people that look like them.
Right.
And I remember, I wouldn't even tell my wife that the week before we got there, they bombed the airport that we were flying in.
Right.
Reverend Herbert Daughtry was over there. He got stuck because he couldn't get out.
See?
And by the time we got in there, he just had gotten out.
Yep.
So this struggle is for real.
Yep.
And the way things are going now, they look like Roe versus Wade. We'll get a chance to talk about that.
Everything.
All these challenges here that are popping up.
Are
And
reversing.
yeah. And you talk about the things and the strides that we've made.
Right.
And you think it's time for us to sit back? No, we're going to have to stand up. This may not be easy.
Right.
Did you ever tell your wife about the bombing at the airport?
After I got back.
Oh, okay, because if not, she would have just heard it.
Yeah, after I got back, I told her.
When after we changed the name, there was such an uproar in the school, and the paradox is that it was not only the white teachers who were disparaging; it was some black teachers. There were a handful of black teachers and administrators that were in favor, but there were a whole lot that were not in favor. It was so bad
That's
that
the principal. That's the principal calling.
Right. It was so bad that I had to go up there and singularly address the entire school in the auditorium, the whole student body, by myself.
And you were
The rest
17?
of the board members, I was 17. No, I was 18. I turned 18. The board wasn't there. But see, here's another thing. When the students at Vailsburg High School in Newark formed a Swahili club, the white parents in that community of Vailsburg literally seized the school. The students called and said, can you please help us get out of the school? Because the students formed, and this is 1973, a club called Swahili, and they had a Martin Luther King program, not even a Malcolm X program. After I got the students out of there, the white people that were in front of the school protesting ran up on me and pulled guns on us.
Wow.
And so he had to have security eventually as a member of the Board of Ed.
That's crazy.
But
That's
At
insane.
18
At
years
18.
old.
It's true,
That's nuts.
but it's
For
a true,
education.
it's a
For
true
education.
story.
but Adema was correct, and what we had to do, what CFUN did, the Committee for Unified Newark, led by which eventually became Congress of African People, headed by Amiri Baraka, we had to bring, in response to the opposition by some football players. I mean, Southside High School had a rich history of athletic
Athletics,
achievement with
The
the name
track
Southside.
team, the football team.
Yeah.
Yes.
So many of the white coaches, many of whom were compatriots to Tony Imperiale, an Italian activist in Newark, a racist, who eventually, upon his death, before his death, seemed to evolve. But having said that, there are many black athletes who needed to be re-educated. So we brought in, for example, Amity brought in Rocky Thompson from
The Giants.
From the Giants, who came to speak to the students to talk about the importance of athletics and history and social activism that we see today with Kaepernick and Ali and people down the line. So we had to do our homework. And I took that as a constructive political self-criticism, knowing how to bring people along while you're doing it. I remember Amity saying to me, you know, the work you did was very well and very good, but sometimes you have to educate people while you're trying to move them along. Similar to what Kwame Nkrumah did, he did not bring people along as he was making sweeping changes in Ghana when they gained independence. So that was an instructive political lesson for me.
Gotcha.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to move this ahead with some of the stories this week. But as you mentioned books, I just want to hold up one book here and also give a, as you said, shout out. I want to give a shout out to our great sister, Terry Williams. This book is Black Pain, Real Talk for When There Is Nowhere to Go, Black Pain. It just looks like we're not hurting. And I springboard right into May. I wanted to make sure because sometimes you put those months together and instead of saying May, you say March. Thank you, Bobby. But May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And on the on-air show, we did a piece on mental health awareness. And I want to start with that today before we get into some of the other stories there. In a sense, is the black community is hurting when it comes to mental health. We have a couple of things. We have where a lot of folks of color don't trust the institutions that are still available out there to deal with mental health. Some folks in the black community may be faith-based and feel that prayer will do it and they don't need no intervention, medical intervention. You have also the spectrum of the oldest age that when you get to that space that it's hard to look in the mirror and accept that things are different now. In the same way you have ailments, physical ailments, you can have mental ailments. And now we're coming to find out more younger folks are also experiencing issues with mental health. I just want to have a little brief discussion about mental health in the black community and what can we do to increase getting out this information and getting help for those folks that need the help.
You know, it's one of those things, and I get it, right? I don't dismiss it in the black community, but it's in every community, and part of it is, you know, it's a big generational piece to it, right? So you have an older generation that did not talk about those kind of things, right? So you have this stigma attached to it. And then you get into name calling, right? So if someone is demonstrating some instability, you know, society is quick to call somebody crazy or loony and all these terms that just cause someone to not want to come forth. But, you know, there's a lot of studies right now that show the millennials and the Gen Z, and this plays out across all generations, all backgrounds and races, about how a younger generation reacts to what's going on with their parents and grandparents. And so a lot of millennials and Gen Zs were born when they saw their parents going through some economic crisis, right? So you see Gen Zs today who were born when and they were born and they were being raised when their parents were going through the Great Recession. And so when you see your parents struggling, that leaves an imprint on you. And so when people are quick to criticize today, to say they're soft, they're not resilient, part of it is the way that they responded and did not get the help, or they got parents that told them to express themselves, right? So you had that generation that says, well, I'm going through rough times, but I'm going to raise my child to not hold back and to express themselves. And so now you see a younger generation, these Gen Zs, late millennials, who are expressing themselves and saying, I can't cope, or this is causing me this anxiety and stress. And again, you get now the stigma coming across saying, oh, well, they're giving them, calling them names. They're soft, everything. There's a lot of anxiety in the world, right? And everybody suffers from some anxiety. It's just a matter of how you cope with it. So if we had more coping approaches versus more criticisms of it, we would start to change things.
And just to echo what you were saying, Bobby, like the younger generations also, and I know you guys touched on this in the first hour, like they have to deal with things that we didn't have to, right? So in terms of social media, like that can be a very, very ugly space at times. So it's like, I can't even fathom being in high school or junior high and have somebody like, you know, let's say someone is bullying somebody and that continues beyond just the school. It goes with you everywhere. It never disappears. They can constantly harass you, pick on you. So they have stuff that they have to deal with that we didn't have to growing up, right? Like we had interactions with each other. We may have had bullying. We may have had other things happen to us, but it was just in that time, in that space. This lives on continuously. And I think the younger generation also realizes the importance of self-care. Whereas like my generation, I don't even know what generation I am now, but my generation, and then
you'd be X.
Some smart,
no,
some
you'd
smart
be
comment.
You'd be Gen X.
I don't know what the
you'd be
the
Gen
cutoff
X.
is for
You'd be
Gen
Gen X.
Well, whatever it is. My
You'd be an
age
older
group
side of Gen
and-
X.
No, the younger side, the bottom of Gen X. But my age, and then like, you know, your generation, like we're taught to be very autonomous, and we can't admit that when we're weak or if we're hurting, and that we have to take care of everything ourselves, and it's not okay to ask for help. Whereas younger people, they're okay saying, I need help with this. I need to take care of myself. We were taught like, oh, you know, you can handle it. Go take care of anything. Do it yourself. And that's also a big divide too that you
But
see.
let me just say this real quick. I want to just jump in real quick.
And then I'd
couple
like to
things,
say something.
there's a couple of things Bobby mentioned, and I agree that it does affect all cultural groups. But African Americans are 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems than the general population. So we see that. Number two, you go back to my generation and the generation, my parents' generation. You got to also look at when they were dealing with mental health issues, because I remember when my mom's was categorized as a problem being mental health. So then she had to go into the psych ward at that particular time. And I never forget, man, it makes me tear up at times. I remember they kept the door locked with the patients in the back. So when they opened up for them to come out in the rec room and visit with the family, when my mother first came out, and I saw my mother shuffling.
That was probably the medication that
It was
they
the
had given.
medication. And we talk about the Prozac and all these things. Back then, they were giving a lot of people, they were experimenting on us too back then. You know, so at the end of the day, yes, we had issues back then. If you did talk about it or did try to get help, a lot of times you didn't get the kind of help because they were practicing on you because they wanted to see how things went. Wow. Number two, I disagree with this here, and we may have to debate it. The young kids, we all went through things in our generation, and the reason why I did this because we have to have better communication, you know. But when we had it rough, our parents told us to toughen up. toughen up. So at the end of the day, we toughed up. Unless there was something that you really saw that we were not operating, we went to school, we was not operating on that scale, then we realized that there was something more wrong that was happening to us. But I can't say the generation, they're just experiencing different things now. And some of the parents would, and the grandparents would look back and say, Bobby and Nither, that, hey, are they weaker than us? And is that wrong? Because a lot of us got.
Let me
was told to us.
let me respond specifically to that, because everybody here so far has made very, very interesting, insightful points. The point is, you're right, Bobby. Everybody in America is suffering trauma. When veterans come back after fighting 2 and 3 and 4 tours of duty, and they come back to the United States under deep traumatic experiences with their lives on the line, and they come back and they can't get help from the VA. That's a crime. They need time to come back into civilian life. We could talk about the struggles and the traumas of women with domestic abuse. We could talk about people of color, the whole identity politics that everybody wants to shirk off and dismiss. People feel the need, and rightfully so, to embrace who they are. And getting back to what you were saying, Fatim, with younger people, and are they getting soft, and we were different, toughen up. There's a personal, individual way of looking at the trials and tribulations of everyday life. But then there's a political aspect to trauma. And right now, under Donald Trump, everybody in America, I would argue, is suffering from deep stress and trauma.
I'll give you a stat. I'll give you a stat, and we come back in there. So there's a stat that shows 1 out of every 4 people in the United States will be suffering at this point in time some mental health issues. And that could range from anxiety to depression to road rage to schizophrenia. And so
suicide,
right, so there is a spectrum, just like you have a mild cold versus you have cancer. And this is what I talk about, part of that stigma. And you're absolutely right. There are so many external forces that bring that about.
Absolutely.
But 1 out of 4, so that means one in this room right here, there's at least 2 of us that are dealing with something right now.
Absolutely. Now, when Larry
I saw it with Larry today when he walked through the door backwards. I was like, what's going on?
And that's a point that Terry Williams actually makes in her book, and when she talks about this, is that people put on a mask and act like they're okay when they're really hurting inside.
Absolutely.
And you don't realize, and I know Dr. Gardir said it too, that you don't realize how much you internalize and what sort of ramifications that can have later on in life. Like I even felt that, like after my dad died and all the stuff we went through, like fighting the police department, all the craziness for years. And I remember actually Terry said it to me. She's like, did you ever talk to anybody after that? And I was like, you know what? I never did. And she was like, that's a lot to deal with. And I saw years and years later how it started coming out in different ways. So it's like you don't fully even understand when you're going through stuff when you need help. And it's so important to have people close to you who can see it for you sometimes.
And you were going through 2 very important elements of trauma. One, on a personal level, you lost your dad.
Yeah.
And you were trying to deal with it politically by fighting against the forces that led to his death, right? Who exacerbated the situation that led to his death, the police and all that. So on a political level, you were struggling with that issue and trying to deal with it, but you weren't taking care of yourself on a personal, emotional level.
Yeah.
Do you
I
understand?
remember I got sick.
Perfect. You're right. You're absolutely right.
When Ademo and I were younger, we had a civil rights movement and a black liberation movement, and Bob as well, because Bob comes from the same generation. We struggled against national oppression, racial oppression politically, by being active. Thank God we had political organizations such as CAP, the NAACP, the Nation of Islam, that put our racial and national oppression in some kind of political context. However, years later, we realize we suffer from internal, personal, individual psychological trauma that a political movement can't completely address.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with therapy, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing wrong with going and speaking to a professional who can help you deal with how you feel about yourself. Let me say this, one word, and we've been using this word, throwing this word around since Donald Trump was elected president. Narcissism. Narcissism is a psychological term that human beings, if they do not, at early stages of their childhood, do not deal with mom and dad being able to idealize the adult, idealize the parent, seeing through the process of getting affirmation from your parents, seeing that they're human, that they are fallible and make mistakes, but loving them anyway, and then separating yourself as an individual and being able to be social with other people. Mm-hmm. That's how you can lessen the possibility of becoming a narcissist like Donald Trump, who never got love from his dad, who just got thrown money at him and he blew it. This man is a classic narcissist. But narcissism is a psychological issue. Mm-hmm. And if you go on YouTube, Wiki or whatever, Freud, many other psychiatrists, psychologists talk about it. But there's both issues as people of color that we have to work on politically, but then there are personal identities and questions of, am I a good person, that we have to deal with on a personal level, that only therapy and open discussion with yourself and overturning yourself can help.
Let me get Bob Pickett and Larry in. Bob Pickett, I'm gonna throw this to you first, and then you, Larry. One of the things it states in this report, many African Americans also have trouble recognizing the signs and symptoms of mental health conditions. So, Bob, have you dealt with maybe a loved one in the past or known someone to deal where there was mental health issue that someone was dealing with and that person wasn't identifying with it? How do you reach them? How do you get to them to say, hey, you may need help? How do you go about that?
Well, I start with my grandparents who grew up and lived in the South, in Mississippi. You know, just the name Mississippi is scary. And I was born in Mississippi. And so my parents and my grandparents would often take me to visit my great-grandparents, who were the residualness of racism in Mississippi. Mississippi was horrible, man.
Yes, it was.
It was horrible. And I visited Mississippi a lot just to remind me and make me to never forget where I came from and where I have to go. But in dealing with my great-grandparents, I would chat with them. I would talk with them. In fact, I remember, and I'll share this with everybody. In the 70s, I got lucky, and I impressed the Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, and he wanted me to come work for him. And one of the things that I did and persuaded him to do was to pay a visit to Mississippi to fully understand, the nature of racism and how it still exists. Not only with my parents, and not only with my grandparents, but my great-grandparents, who at that point were in their 90s. And that, quite frankly, was an eye-opening period in my life, and put me on a path to always be a fighter against white racism, period.
But Bob is also being very, very modest in that.
Can Larry answer that question? Dealing with the whole thing where some folks have trouble recognizing,
Right.
or they don't want to admit that
Right.
they have these issues. How do you help them?
Right. Well, this is a very serious issue in our community, and one in which society does not allocate enough resources to deal with, particularly in our schools. We need more mental health counselors. Insurance companies have a tendency not to want to cover mental health services when they really should, and so forth. I've had to deal with this issue. People around me have had people who are very close to me have had to go to therapy. That's when Achilles said, "Don't be afraid to go to therapy," he really hit the target, because there's a stigma in our community attached to having mental health issues. And, we don't want to think that we have a problem or that our family members have a problem, but we have problems. So if you see sudden changes in behavior, particularly in your children, like particularly with young girls now, cutting is an issue.
Yes.
And, got to understand that if you have a two-parent family, both parents are not equally spending the same amount of time with the children. So the mother may see something that the father does not. And when the parent who doesn't see this behavior, when it's brought to their attention, you really have to be as cooperative as possible and seek help. Don't even get into a thing, well, they just need to straighten up or they just need to change it. No, people, and young people in particular, need help. If you see sudden changes in a child's behavior, that's a sign that they may be dealing with an internal issue and they may need help. If you see changes in your behavior, for instance, if you cry a lot, where you didn't cry a lot before, and all of a sudden you're sitting around and for no reason at all, you're starting to cry, you're suffering from some depression, and you need to get some help. So this is a very serious issue in our community. I've had friends in the psych ward. I remember the first time I went to see someone that was hospitalized and in the psych ward, how the security thing was just that by itself, was enough to shake me up. That you couldn't just walk in like you do in any other ward in the hospital. You had to have clearance and so on and so forth. Fortunately, my friend who was in there did not have to spend an inordinate amount of time, received counseling, and was released, and hadn't had any problems since. But this is a serious problem in our community.
All right.
When it comes up, deal with it. And in the meantime, we should be demanding. For instance, police need more mental health counseling. I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much police brutality. It's because these police and prison COs, imagine having to work in a prison every day. That has to have some impact on your mental health.
And then overlay 1 out of 4.
1 out of 4.
1 out of 4. 1 out of 4
Right.
police officers at this point in time.
Just yesterday, they announced that in the country that has the highest rate of suicide of industrial nations, which is the United States, we have the highest rate of suicide. The suicide rate has now increased.
Yeah.
And for the first time, female suicide, particularly among young girls, is on the rise and catching up to. I didn't know this, that male suicide is more frequent, but now we're seeing an increase in female suicide.
And just to add to what you were saying about police, they also need to be trained in how they react to people who are suffering from mental illness. Because a
Exactly.
lot of times there are people suffering, and instead of treating the person the right way, they end up escalating a situation and harming that person. And a lot of police shootings are actually that as well too. And then you see so many people who just look in New York City right here. You see so many people on the street every single day that are either talking to themselves, that are just
Absolutely.
immensely
And it's on
suffering
the
and are
increase.
not getting help. And instead, a lot of times they get locked up, thrown in jail, and there's nobody advocating for them.
But one
There's
of the
no
things
services for them.
But one of the things here, and I want to, I lost my thought on the on-air show this morning, is that I get mad at a lot of companies that now they play these games of giving certain amount of hours that you can't get health insurance. So now, okay, so you increase their hourly wage to $15 an hour, and that's good. Okay, but at the end of the day, if you don't have health care and you can't pay for health care, how do you go out there and get that type of treatment? Yeah, you may need physical treatment, but you may need mental treatment also. How do you go about life and you
It's
got
all
to go through
connected.
these struggles and you can't get help? And then people say, well, all you have to do is go out there and get help. How do you go out there and get help?
Well, one
And
of the
then we
for
have a
it?
political context that is becoming meaner, that is becoming less compassionate, that is becoming more angry, and that anger and uglier, and that anger is being justified by powerful politicians, hint, hint, rather than compassion. And that's a major problem. And it trickles down throughout society, and it touches on, and it gives permission, Fatim, for corporations and companies to be less
Exactly.
compassionate.
So just, I know we got other topics to cover. So just a couple of things on there, right? So if you work, wherever you work, and if you have never inquired because you were afraid of stigma, or you're afraid people in your employment is going to know that you're trying to deal with something, seek some help. Most Fortune 1,000 companies, if not more, they have employee assistance programs. And the reason they put those in place is because they have made an investment in their workforce. They want them to be productive. If you're dealing with something, then you can't be your full productivity. So they do have that available. Most people in a company don't even know it exists. So reach out to your HR departments and find out whether you have that. So that's one.
And there are HIPAA laws that protect your privacy.
Exactly. Well said. The other thing, Larry, you talked about, right, around the example around crying, right? And like I said earlier, there's this thing that when someone demonstrates behavior that's out of the norm, most people criticize it or call it a name. I'll give you a sports reference. Joel Embiid, the center for the Philadelphia 76ers, when they got eliminated by Toronto, the 4-bounce shot that Kawhi Leonard hit, right after that happened, he breaks down and he's crying on the court and going back to the locker room. But what did, as you said, the social media world do? They attacked him, call him names. He's soft. Look, they've changed into a meme. They go to make fun of it, right? And while some people will laugh, what it actually does is it reinforces people not to demonstrate the feelings and thoughts that they have. It is a natural act to cry. We all cried coming into this world. So why do we criticize people when they cry? It's actually, when you talk to therapists, it is a sign.
Crying is good.
And it allows you to get some of those emotions out, which then should be followed with a conversation.
Yes, that's right. All right, well, we're going to switch topics, but I want to read a few things here that people say. Pat Johnson says, I will be making my appointment with Dr. Jeff Gardere after listening to this open line 8 a.m. this morning.
It's going to make you.
She also said, yes, Mr. Ham, insurance company will pay for the most basic, which means you sign up and no real help is administered. Rhonda Hairston said this is a great topic and one that is needed for the black community. And she goes on, some of the politicians may have mental illness. Just look at the laws that govern the people in this country. Makes no sense. And then Edward Lanson says, preach, Bobby, preach.
Yes, also Edie Jones Schwimmer says, yes, 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 and yes. to mental health content today.
Right.
So,
Trying to show off.
He's showing
I
off,
know.
from
Reading
his
off your watch.
yeah,
trying to show off.
I'm looking at my iWatch. Yeah. So that was a
I appreciate that.
That was a smooth
I'm not
move.
mad.
But let me just say real quick before we jump off that
Gotta make it in
people
1 minute,
people
Larry.
should reference the writings and the speeches of Joy DeGruy.
Yes.
Who
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
who put forward the theory of the post-traumatic slave syndrome, which, by the way, has been verified by science that trauma is felt even at the molecular level. That when you suffer traumatic experiences, it actually chemically affects your DNA, and your changed DNA is passed through your sperm and your eggs onto your children. So one of the reasons black people have more mental health issues is because of the trauma that we have suffered. First, 250 years of enslavement in this country, then another 100 years of slavery by another name called Jim Crow, and the continued racial oppression that we exist today. So you can go on YouTube, see Joy DeGru's speeches, and also get her books and read her stuff.
I spoke with her about 2 months ago, and I think Bob Pickett introduced her to us. She came in, and our late great Bob Slade, he debated her. He didn't really believe in this post-traumatic slave syndrome, but she really broke it down. And I'm trying to get her back on. She said that she's concentrating more on writing right now instead of lectures. But I told her appearances is well needed.
She is
especially
a
with
great
Dr.
lecturer.
Frances Wells Crescent
Yes.
passed.
Yes.
We definitely need her.
And Bob Slade used to always say, "Get your mind right."
And get your mind right. There you go. All right. So I know that the control room was like, Fatin, you gave us a whole sheet, and but I decided to switch, because at times, you just go with
No,
the
I
feeling.
think it was a good move. Fatin.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right, so let's go on. One of the things that happened this week, we saw here in the city of New York, was the Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that he was running for president. And of course, when he was announcing I think this is the first person that announced this year running for president that you had protesters
Everybody
right
said, "No,
there,
thank you."
And then when we did rapid fire on the on-air portion of OpenLine this morning, there was not one person that said that they agreed with him running for president. Your thoughts?
Well, one of the things. I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, it's
Go ahead.
okay. Go ahead. I mean, you already know my feelings on this. I say
Go ahead.
thanks, but no thanks. And as you guys all know, in full disclosure, I did work briefly in the administration
Oh,
as a
that's
speechwriter
right.
years ago.
I remember those
But,
traumatic days you worked.
yeah,
Yes.
so
Yeah, she
I will
needed
just,
help. Yeah.
Yes. Those
thanks,
phone
but no
calls.
thanks. We will pass.
Those phone calls talking you off the ledge. I
Yep, she
remember
reached
that.
out for help.
That's not how it happened.
Yeah, no. So it's funny. His announcement, he actually got scooped, and so there was this teenager. I forget which state he was in, but he aspires to be a political journalist, and he was doing some research, and he woke up one morning and he saw that the Iowa caucus had announced on their website that Bill de Blasio was coming to town. And he said, well, the only reason you do that is when someone is declaring to run for the presidency. Right. So he reached out to them. They quickly took the site down. And then the next day, de Blasio announced it. Now, de Blasio was trying to do what Kamala Harris said. She went out there and she announced it on Good Morning America. And so he was trying to get a big splash.
That's so stupid because a couple months ago when Reverend Jesse Jackson did his annual thing at the Sheraton, he at the dinner spoke and he was like, I think it was Ed Gordon who was hosting or whatever, and he asked him, before you walk off stage, I need to ask you, are you planning on running? And he came back to the mic, de Blasio did, and said, I will just say I'll be going to Iowa very soon, or to go visit the good people of Iowa very soon. So it's like you're basically announcing anyway.
Exactly.
But this splash that he wanted to make.
Yeah,
Bob.
he wanted to make his big splash, and this teenager's killed. So I'm not surprised he's not getting a lot of accolades, right? Because the rumors, if you believe them, were that he has been disconnected for quite some time as the mayor of New York because
saying he's bored.
because he aspires for the bigger limelight. He wants his name to be out there. Now, there are some good things that has happened under his administration in New York City, but there are some things that are still fundamentally broken and have actually, one would argue, have gotten worse. So I'll give you two examples. The transportation system in New York City has not gotten better. It's gotten worse. Anybody who's riding the L trains and
any train,
it's worse, right? And the other one is NYCHA. So looking at public housing in New York under his administration, it has gotten worse. Now, to be said, it was already in a tailspin when he got into office, but he has done nothing to slow it down. And his constant bickering with the governor is just ridiculous, right? Because he's always saying he can't get the funding to do what he needs because him and Cuomo keep going back and arguing over things. And so, I'm not surprised that he's not getting a lot of positive publicity on stuff, and he's going to try to be this tough New Yorker, which is actually going to not play well outside of New York, because as we've all seen in the rural areas, they already think New Yorkers are arrogant. The fact that Trump got past that is still a miracle, but de Blasio coming out saying, we New York is this, we New York is that, is going to turn off most of the voting public that he would need if he was legit.
There's another reason that I think, my personal opinion, is that we all notice in the media that there's been a feud between the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York State. And Andrew Cuomo, the governor, stated that he was not going to run for president this term. But I think that Andrew Cuomo may think about it in 2024. He may think about running, and I think, this is my opinion, is that Mayor de Blasio wanted to get a jump on him to do that. Now, it's interesting that we just got a text here on Facebook by Edward Lansing that says,
YouTube.
"Let's remember that YouTube. Let's remember that Bill Clinton started off at 6% when he ran and became a two-term president." Just wanted to put it out there, and that is interesting because that is true, and
But he wasn't the mayor.
Right, he wasn't the mayor. But the point I'm pointing out this morning is that Mayor de Blasio has ran for other offices, and he's won. And when he got in, his poll numbers were not good. And if he gets into these debates and does well, then he can sway some folks at the end of the day. And the bottom line is, we want to put somebody out there that can beat Trump. I don't know if it's him right now. I don't believe he can, but we don't know.
Play that out more, right? So if he makes it to the primaries, he's not going to get the votes of New Yorkers. He's just not, and that's very telling, right?
But there's still enough votes that he still will carry the state blue.
But that is a everybody will jump on that to say, wait, your own city and your own state did not endorse you during the primaries. Even if you win, his ego would kick in. I mean, he already saw his reaction.
Criticism, however, and I'm not going to mention any names, but that same criticism can be made about other candidates now running
Trump
with their own. I'm talking about Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
Booker.
But
I think a lot of them are like de Blasio is doing it to raise their profile.
Yes.
And raise money. Let's be clear.
That too.
You create a campaign to run for president, and the money pours in. You have a war chest that you can do anything you want with. You don't have to give it back at this point. There's no law saying you have to give it back. So, cynically speaking, a lot of people are doing this to create financial war chests.
Could he make? And then I want to jump into something because you mentioned Senator Kamala Harris. I want to jump into that. But could he make a good vice president?
Who, de Blasio?
De Blasio.
Hey, if Joe Biden could be vice president, anybody could be vice president.
If Mike Pence could be vice
Vice
president,
president.
anybody could be vice president.
My thing is like this. My thing is like this. That some of the folks now, and we'll go into this, and it happened also last week, is that with Kamala Harris, a lot of folks, since Biden has jumped in, the polls have he's been steady. So when de Blasio came in, he's not the next flavor of the week. When other candidates jumped in, they jumped up. But with Biden jumping in, I'm looking at Larry because right now I just don't see. And again, we're going to see where Bernie goes, but Bernie's not moving right now.
He actually went down a little bit.
So right now Biden is there, and a lot of people are saying
But he's still
Biden.
he's still.
Well,
at
he's
the
still
top.
he's still up there. but
He ain't moved down to the.
Yeah.
He's
No,
still-
that's not what
no
I'm saying.
debates have taken place.
Exactly.
yet.
But the
Right, it's
point,
still
No
very
debate.
early.
It's much too early.
right? It's still much too
early.
early. The point is that, and that's the point I'm getting to, is that a lot of folks are looking at a potential Biden-Harris ticket. Joe
Right, we
Biden and
talked about
Kamala
that.
Harris.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting. Someone presented that question to Senator Kamala Harris. What do you think about Joe Biden? And her response was, "Oh, I think he would make a good
That
vice
was a
president."
great response. That was
But
a
at the end of the day, we got to beat. I mean, again, no debates have taken place, but we have to be formulating what is the best and strongest ticket right now for the Democrats.
Well, I said that
You
on
know,
the,
who
on
can
the
be?
show a long time ago, and we talked about how we thought it was going to be something like Biden or Kamala, and then Biden actually, there was talk that he was exploring even Stacey Abrams, and her response to that question was good too. She said something to the effect of like, "You don't run for the second spot, you run for the first place."
Right.
But that being said, like at the end of the day, me personally, whoever it's going to end up being, I will vote for that person because I'm not voting for Donald Trump. But to your point, Fatine, it is way too early. None of the debates have taken place, but I'm trying to figure out how they're going to physically fit all of these people on a debate stage.
They're
because
not.
Can't they?
They're not. They're not.
They're
They're
going
not.
to do
They're gonna-
multiple, right?
they're gonna-
Tiers
And
like
then-
Right.
Right. criteria.
Because
Right. They're going to apply fundraising criteria and poll numbers. And there's going to be a cutoff.
Yeah.
And that's what they did during the Republican.
yeah, right.
And but I want to step back for a minute and look at the forest and not just the trees. The question is, why are there 23 Democrats running? Clearly, this has to be an historical precedent that you have this many Democrats at a time when one would think that the Democratic Party would want to be the most unified. It is now showing the most divisions. The Republicans didn't have 23. We thought 17 was an inordinate amount of candidates. We have 23 candidates, and God only knows with a year to go until the conventions, who else might jump in the race?
They may get up to like the NCAA and have 64 teams vying for this.
I suspect. I could be wrong. I'm putting
Bobby,
on my
here comes you
I'm
for the
putting on
bracket
my
breakdown.
Money.
my tinfoil hat now.
War
and
chest, money.
Conspiracy
Follow the money.
that there are forces that are pushing people to run. I think some people, yes, they're running based on their own ambition, but there are discussions that take place amongst the elite. And I really think that some of these people have been urged to run, not just because the people urging them believe them to be the best candidate. I think that there's an effort to have a brokered convention. That is, that they don't want Bernie Sanders to get 50% of the delegates on the first ballot. Because if Bernie gets 50%, the superdelegates won't kick in. There's still going to be superdelegates. Superdelegates haven't been eliminated, but the number of superdelegates has been decreased, and the point at which their votes will be weighed has also been changed. I think that the establishment is, at this point, anybody but Bernie.
Neoliberals.
And that, I mean, look at it, 25 candidates, they're almost one for each state. So they go in and they don't give up their delegates, because remember, when you go into the convention, you go in with your delegates.
Right.
You know, so de Blasio could have 10 delegates could make the difference between 50% and 49%, and on and on and on.
And if Bernie's people and if Bernie say anything that's critical of what is happening, this brokered convention, as you're theorizing, he can then be seen as, oh, he is the spoiler.
Right.
He's the bad guy.
Right.
He's the bad guy. Let's dismiss Bernie Sanders. So basically what we're looking at, as far as I'm concerned, it's a struggle, it's an ideological struggle going on within the Democratic Party, and there's a neoliberal wing, and then there's a more progressive Bernie Sanders, Democratic Socialist, Ocasio.
It's 2016 that never got resolved.
And
Yeah.
it's exactly right. And given your theory, don't rule out Hillary Clinton trying to come in
that's not
as don't rule it out.
That's
don't
what
rule it
Pickett
out.
always says.
Yeah, I do. I want to jump. I gotta jump to this because we're running out of time
I don't accept
here.
these polls because I've seen some writing about the Biden numbers, and they're saying that whole categories were left
I didn't
out.
hear you say that
in the count.
when your other guy was leading.
Who was leading?
Bernie?
I didn't hear you say that when Bernie was leading.
No,
about the
because
polls.
nobody disputed the polls. One of the polls that came out with Biden has been disputed. They're saying that they hadn't counted a certain category. I think it was under 44-year-olds.
right.
That wasn't said about
I'm not taking
Right.
offense,
No.
but I'm just saying that I'm just seeing how it's handled now with Biden consistently been in there so far, not very long, but he's holding steady. And even the conversation right now, he's brought some stability to the Democratic Party in the conversation right now. He has, to the point of that now there is
I think
somebody
more
there that
it's more
clearly can beat Trump.
It's more accurate to say that the media has interpreted his
Okay, I give you that.
entry
Yes.
There you go.
as-
I give you that.
Right.
as
Less threatening.
I give you
Right.
that.
And-
I give you that.
And I have seen polls that show that Biden could beat Trump, Sanders could beat Trump, Warren could beat Trump,
I see it
and
too.
even Beto O'Rourke can beat Trump. So this thing about Biden is not the only one that can beat Trump. And I think the Democrats are painting themselves into a disastrous corner if they base their whole strategy on this thing of quote unquote electability.
I agree with
I
that. I
agree.
mean, we got to get to that point, but I want to.
I agree.
Because I'm looking at the
Here's
clock
the
here.
thing.
There was,
Polls, as we've learned, because who's the president, polls don't mean
Exactly.
anything.
What was
There
it,
you
Sarah
go.
Palin?
All right, now we're going to switch
Somebody
topics. We
said
got to
polls
switch
are for
topics.
strippers.
We
Yeah,
got to
polls
go
are for
into
strippers. There you go.
This week there was another story that hit, and that's a big story, and it's going to be a big story for quite a while moving forward, and that is dealing with the Alabama Senate
Lord.
approved a measure this past Tuesday that would outlaw almost all abortions in the state. And this basically
Well,
is setting up
six
a
to 8 states now.
well,
Some
yeah, well,
states.
8 states. It's eight states. I have a list of those 8 states too, where this may set up a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. The legislation bans abortion at every stage of pregnancy and criminalizes the procedure for doctors who could be charged with felonies and face up to 99 years in prison. It includes an exception for cases when the mother's life is at risk, but
does
not
not.
for the case of rape
Not
or
for
incest.
rape or incest.
Which
Right.
is just
So, Nither, I would like to hear
outrageous.
your.
I mean, just the fact that if a doctor who performs an abortion can get more jail time than somebody who commits rape
That's
or
crazy.
incest is just, I'm trying not to curse, but it's freaking insane.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, yes, you're right, that there are 8 states now that have passed all kinds of draconian laws, but this is the most egregious one out of all of them because it's at every stage of pregnancy. Let's not pretend that in the other states where they call it, what is it, the heartbeat bill, where it's banned. I think Georgia is 8 weeks and then Missouri is 6 weeks. Now there are many women who don't even know that they're pregnant at that time, and I'm trying so hard not to curse because this story just pisses me off to no end that this is where we are in 2019 because people my age and younger, we have lived during a time where Roe v. Wade was the law. And now you're seeing in the same way that the Voting Rights Act was virtually gutted by the Supreme Court, this is what they're trying to do with abortion now, because they even said this themselves. In Alabama, they were like, we want this to end up, we're making it so harsh that it ends up in the Supreme Court because they want to eventually invalidate it. And now that you have Kavanaugh and you have a conservative leaning Supreme Court, this could very well happen. And this is why women were outraged when Donald Trump won, why so many protested right after that election, why we have been talking about this forever and people have been ignoring it. And the fact that this is where we are is insane. And if those 25 white men who voted for this law in Alabama actually cared about women's health, they would do something about the women who are suffering extreme mortality rates, infant mortality rates too. Alabama, I think it was
Number one.
twice in the last 5 years, they were number one in infant mortality. And these are the children that they care to claim so much, claim to care about so much, and they're doing nothing about that or women's health, women's reproductive health. And let's be clear that people who have money and means will travel outside of the state if they need an abortion and do things like that. And it's going to be primarily women of color and poor women who are going to suffer the most because of this law.
What I don't get is how there's so much draconian legislation and regulations on a woman's body, but we can't do that on a gun. How did a gun get
Exactly.
more
Excellent
rights
point, Bobby.
than a woman's body?
Because a gun is an extension in many ways of the male personality
Of manhood, yes.
of men. I mean, it's a phallic symbol.
It's a male-dominant society, also. So that's my
I
biggest.
think this is. I have a daughter.
We all have daughters.
Not all
Two
of us.
daughters. Okay.
I was a daughter.
I
still have a
I-
daughter.
As a father, I am outraged. And if I agree with Cory Booker on one thing, every man who sees himself as progressive should be outraged what's happening.
Exactly.
And women, when they march in the streets, we need to be out there. How dare a man assume dominion over a woman's body? I don't.
I mean, just
it's just
imagine,
it's just arrogant. It's the arrogance.
Like, imagine some woman getting raped and then she's forced to carry that child to birth. I mean, like,
This law was so outrageous that even Pat Robertson, who is anti-abortion, pro-life, anti-abortion, said that they were going too far. In with this particular law.
Well, I spoke to a friend, a white male, and it was shocking what I heard from him. He said, "This is white men who are afraid of a black planet and are assuming that if we make these laws so draconian, forcing white women to go to term, that it will raise the birth rate of white Americans. You're shutting out Muslims and immigrants. You're creating a wall down in Mexico, and it will just raise." And I found it to be so bizarre, but is it plausible?
This is it's just mind blowing, right? But we saw signs of this, right? When Trump was running, he talked about how he wanted to get the judges in place and actually push the rights back to the states. And so what you're seeing right now are these states that are saying, you said this was going to happen, you gave us the judges, so now we're going to do what we can do to get the rights back in these states. But again, the hypocrisy, because we know that many of these legislators who, well, see, I shouldn't say no, because Bob would slap me. I don't know. I would not be surprised if they themselves have not paid for their mistresses to have abortions.
They're the biggest hypocrites.
Right? And
Donald Trump.
And so it is just mind blowing. One of our viewers out there, just the word you used, correct, mind blowing, that this is going on in this day and age. Again, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, these laws that are going in, and they're going to force something to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court, I believe, is going to do everything in their power to avoid having to rule on it, and it's going to end up getting back to the states, and you're going to get some softening of Roe versus Wade, where the states are going to have more power to do this silly.
This is a form of slavery.
Yeah.
This is a form of chattel slavery. It's
I-
sexual slavery.
Well,
I
mean,
Bobby,
this is,
I just disagree about the Supreme Court thing, because I think it's going to end up being something like what happened with
Yeah,
the
but-
Voting Rights Act.
but
And
I-
then you're going to see, because right after that happened, you saw dozens of states implement harsh voter ID laws and all kinds of laws impacting people's voting rights and basically inhibiting their voting rights. And I think you're going to see the same thing. So it's like the states are pushing this. And remember, they do this all the time, conservatives. They make stuff so extreme so that people are outraged. And then they say, okay, we'll take away this part of it. So I feel like even Trump said that the incest and the rape part went too far. So when it ends up somewhere like the Supreme Court, they'll say, okay, we'll take this part away or something to that effect, and then still put in an extremely harsh or a reversal of Roe v. Wade in and of itself.
But I think
we
at
saw
the-
that with the Muslim
but I
ban
thi-
too. Very extreme. Then they pull back, and it still goes into
But I
effect.
think at the end of the day, and I believe in women's rights and privacy, but you say at the end of the day it's slavery. I don't want to sit here and debate it, but there is a debate on this. When that heartbeat is there, is that a living child? I'm just saying
I
there
hear
is
you.
a legitimate question.
But there's a flip
and-
side to that.
Well, there's a-
Viability. Wait, I hear you. You're saying if there's a heartbeat, there's a life. But
that's
that
what I'm
life,
saying.
but that
That's
life
the thing.
cannot be sustained without without viability, and that necessitates a woman's body.
I
And
agree with
she
that.
has the ultimate right to decide what happens inside and to her body.
hear
Exactly.
you,
and
but I'm
nobody,
just saying-
and nobody else, Fatin, nobody else has a right to impose their view on somebody else. You are not allowed to have a state-sanctioned law saying you. Well, apparently we do now, but you should not have a state.
Well, I'm just saying that the other
saying
side
you
felt,
can have your view.
but the other,
No,
it's not my view. I'm just saying that I'm just saying
you personally.
but
I'm
beca-
saying the
before
other side.
Roe versus Wade, what was the law of the land? What was the law?
The law of the land, it was against the law to have an abortion.
Right, that's what
And
I'm saying.
women-
So,
and
so
women
from the
went-
flip,
and
so from
women
the
went
flip
into
side,
that-
so
and
from
women-
the flip
and
side,
what-
wait, let me just make the
hard to get
point.
there.
Let me make my point. From the flip side of that, that's all I'm saying. From the flip side, they're looking at it that at one time it was that way, and that
like
Roe
saying-
versus Wade.
That's like saying slavery at
Let-
one
let
time
him
was
finish.
there.
I got you.
Let
I
him
hear
finish,
you.
we can come
I hear
back.
you. I think
Let
that's
him
what I'm
finish.
You know
saying.
what?
point.
But I'm just
don't
saying
don't
that
flip
there's
that
a flip-
side. Don't flip that side. Go ahead, Larry.
No.
I just think that I'm not going to do that. I think that at the end of the day, that those people that feel that there's a heartbeat, they have a legitimate concern. But I do agree with Roe versus Wade, my personal opinion. But I do understand the passion from that other side. I do understand when
You
they
can
say
have
when
your-
that fetus has a heartbeat, is that a life?
You can
but-
have your own personal views till the end of time. But you should not be able to impose those views on other people, and that is the bottom line. And you should not force women to believe the same thing that you do. And that is why the 6 Democratic leaders that objected to this in Alabama forcefully, 5 of whom were black. Now let's remember, Alabama is in the Bible Belt in the South, where extremely socially conservative on some issues, but those black lawmakers knew that this was going to impact their community the most, and this is why they were so vocal in their opposition, and they deserve props for that.
Yeah, remember somebody just said
if
that.
every-
and that's
if-
what I'm saying. They say that these states have women that are voters too. That's why it's so important when we talk about not just going out there voting every 4 years for the presidential elections, or at the end of the day, we got to look at the state elections. That's why you have to be involved in the process. But we gotta move on from
These
this, everybody.
states have voters too, where the voters are suppressed more than any other place in the United States.
If men could get pregnant,
Roe,
that the votes would have been totally different. Period.
before Roe, women were dying in large numbers
Self-abortion.
because of self and botched and everything else. Why did Roe come into existence?
To save
because
life.
the situation before it was so horrible. That's why Roe came into existence.
Exactly.
Why did civil rights laws come into existence? Because the situation before it was so horrible. Under
Exactly.
these laws, if white men raped black women, they would be forced to have those children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Larry.
That's right.
I agree 1000%.
Yeah. Well, let's move on because we have a couple more topics here. Another police killing 2 weeks ago. We have the young lady in Houston, Texas, and
Was she mentally ill by the way?
that's what they say. She suffers from mental illness. But let's just take a look at the video. Why are the police using deadly force? We're starting to see the increase of black women now. We're starting to see the increase of black women with
It's interfering. Your watch.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh,
there you go.
okay.
yeah. We started to see the increase.
The Wi-Fi from his watch. The signal.
He's too high tech.
He's too high tech for the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things,
Yeah,
Larry, as
yeah,
you protested numerous times about police brutality,
It's giving
and we looked at black men, but Sandra Bland and a whole host of other women have been brutalized or shot or killed or maimed by police, and we see the increase on black women today. And this horrific shooting here where they said that she grabbed his taser, but the police officer already shot his taser at her. It had to be reemployed so that it could, yes, it has
Recharge.
to. Yeah,
Has to be
it has to
re-
recharge,
yeah,
exactly.
reset it,
So
right.
she was not a threat. She was on the ground when this officer shot her 5 times.
Well,
What
what,
is your- what
what
is-
I don't get about it, right, which is he confronted her alone, right? So as he rolled up on her, he asked her some questions. He didn't wait for backup, right? Now I thought their training was when they were going to arrest somebody or bring them in, you wait for backup. He didn't wait for any backup. He, in my opinion, escalated this situation in this tragic way out there. And you're absolutely right. He shot her with a taser. It didn't put her down. They struggle. She grabs it out of his hand. But what threat was her shooting him with a taser that had not been reset? Correct. And then he shoots her 5 times. And then the immediate reaction from the police department there was, it was justified.
Correct.
Yeah. We often talk about the school to prison pipeline, but what gets left out of the conversation is the fact that in school, the students who receive sometimes the harshest punishment or who get suspended are young black girls because they're seen as unruly, acting out, and they get disciplined the most. Really? And that's where it begins, and it continues on from there. And you're absolutely right in talking about this, that you're seeing an increase in incarceration rates are among women, and nobody, this always gets left out of the conversation, and I'm glad we're talking about it now. And this case is just really,
Did we
really
mention
sad.
her name? If we didn't, her name is
name?
Pamela Turner.
Thank you.
Pamela Turner. I don't know if we had mentioned her name. Pamela Turner.
It's disgraceful. And the reason it continues to happen is because people, particularly those who are in decision-making positions, in policy-making decisions, refuse to give race the weight that it deserves in these situations. They refuse to accept the fact that black people's lives are not valued as much as white people's lives. Just last night, I was in the bar. I was at a club, my favorite club called Marlowe's.
Sorry, you were in a club?
I was in the
What?
club.
You got your one plug in there.
Last night, and I was talking with the owner, wonderful man, Rufus Edmundo. I go to Marlowe's regularly. And just last night, Rufus was telling me about a situation where a black man stole the sheriff's car.
What?
Stole the sheriff. Oh, no, excuse me. I take it back. A white man stole the sheriff's car. And there was a multi-police car pursuit of
And
this
nothing
white
happened
man.
to him.
And nothing happened. They brought him in.
Well, remember,
alive.
I showed you, I don't know, months ago with this I forget where it was, but this white cop got beat up. He pulled over this white teenager. The teenager fought him, jumped in his car, and drove away. He didn't fire one shot at him.
if this woman had been white, she'd be alive this morning.
Look.
She'd be alive.
There you go.
Look, this is on a national scale, state-sanctioned terrorism. Period. End of story.
Period. All right, that's it. That's it. This
But-
past
but
Monday,
let me
we
just
got to
let me
move
just
these
add
stories
real quick.
All right.
One of the reasons we don't take race into account is because we have set up a legal superstructure that has in fact demanded that race not be taken into account.
Right. That's true. Like, you
I
got that.
propose that we need an amendment to the Constitution that recognizes race and the need to deconstruct racial inequality in this country.
I mean,
because the Constitution, one of the reasons
Larry, we gotta go.
One of the
We gotta
reasons
move
we're
on
in
here.
this situation is because in the very Constitution of the United States, the founding document was codified into law, white superordination and black
But how do you
subordination.
get that, Larry, where affirmative action is under attack?
How do you get the ERA?
I'm just saying, at the end of the day,
How do you get the-
everything
how do
under
you get
this
the
is being
ERA?
attacked
How do you-
that deals with race.
Yes.
Even to the point of now our black colleges now, at the end of the
But
day.
these
But I'm not
problem-
saying that you're not right,
But
because
these-
I know the disparity that's what's going on out here.
And these problems are going to continue as long as the extraordinary condition and historical circumstances of the descendants of enslaved people in this country
Continue to control
is
it.
ignored.
Yeah.
It's ignored. In fact, not only is it ignored, you just pointed out that the law itself prevents us from even taking that into account.
Exactly. All right. I mean, I'm not blowing you off because that's true, and I agree with you. But just trying to get these stories in there. This past Monday, we saw the New York Police Department disciplinary trial against Daniel Pantaleo. That is the police officer being charged in the chokehold death of Eric Gardner. And if he is found guilty, he can lose his job. I do not know which way this is going to go. At the end of the day,
How many years has it been?
about
4 or 5?
5 years.
5 years. Yeah.
5 years.
Yes. Now he may lose his job 5 years
He
later.
may lose
Well,
his
the
job.
most controversial piece of that was the text message and the testimony from the supervisor. And what was the quote he said when he said, that the message came across that Eric had passed away? What was the comment that he made there,
Yeah, I'm looking
Fatin?
for
He
that
said,
now. He's. Oh God, I get it for you.
Well, essentially,
He said it's a justified homicide.
no, he didn't even say that. No.
What'd he say?
He said something. I have to look that up. I'll get it for you in a minute.
But it's amazing that like all of these stories are not making the headway that they should be, making the national headlines, because it's all Donald Trump 24/7 and the infighting and like coverage of police brutality and shootings. None of this stuff even barely gets mentioned on the networks anymore. It's all just Trump.
well, I placed it at the doorstep of Mayor Bloomberg, who was mayor at the time.
Not a big deal. Excuse me.
That's
Not
it, not a big deal.
Not a big deal.
Not a big deal that someone had
Black
died.
life doesn't matter.
That someone
Black
died.
life doesn't
Not a
matter.
big deal. You were doing your job.
Yes.
Not a big
And
deal.
I heard pandemonium broke out in the court
Yeah.
after people heard that.
Yeah,
And juxtapose that against the policemen in Minneapolis.
Right.
The black policeman in Minneapolis that was found guilty, put on trial, sentenced, and the family of the white woman he shot was given the highest award in the history, $20 million
Within, like, a
in
year,
the
right?
history of
Yeah.
police brutality cases. Look at that, and look at Pantaleo. Pantaleo strangles a person to death. 5
On
years,
video.
still on the force.
on an illegal
video,
chokehold.
everybody saw
on an
it.
illegal
Right.
chokehold that is outlawed for the
It's
NYPD
white privilege,
officers
white
to use.
supremacy.
For selling Lucy's.
Exactly.
For selling Lucy's.
Crazy. This
Loose
is
And it's so
cigarettes.
sad that his daughter passed away too. That just That it
Just
just adds to the
talk about
sadness
trauma
whole
of the
talk-
mother
exactly,
and
to bring the
wife.
conversation full circle, and how because she dedicated so much of her life to try to get justice for her dad, and ended up dying herself from, was it a heart attack? I think she went into cardiac arrest.
went into cardiac
and
arrest.
it brings it back
She
to what we were
died of
saying.
heartbreak.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Yeah.
But I want to turn to
said.
Bobby Childs right now. Bobby, you had mentioned something earlier. So a couple of sports stories out there from, I'm not going to go into, I'll let you go into them, but of course the NBA playoff, you got the New York Knicks situation, you got Tiger Woods, and you got the New York Jets.
Yeah, so I won't go through all of them, but the Knicks, everybody was, tank for Zion was the chant that I just think silly fans have been saying because they wanted the Knicks to get the #1 pick. The NBA had changed the rules this year to prevent teams from intentionally losing so that they would get the top pick. So they had a 14% chance along with 2 other teams. They ended up getting the 3rd pick in the draft. So everyone believes Zion Williamson from Duke will be gone. The second best player everyone's projecting, John Morant from Murray State, will be gone. And so the question is, who will the Knicks take at number 3, or will they try to package it for a deal out there? So you had a lot of emotions going back and forth in that. And then speaking of emotions, Tiger Woods was back out there on the greens, and he didn't make the cut. So after winning the green jacket a couple of weeks ago, he's battling some illness. It's a tough course here in it's actually in the New York area,
PGA.
and he didn't make the cut. So he was +5. The cut was +4, so he didn't make that. Brooks
stroke.
Koepka, who's just a physical specimen and deep into hip hop, is the guy who's just crushing it on a course right now. And then last but not least, the New York Jets. I know we have some Jet fans out there.
Right.
They fired their general manager, which appears to be this power play between the new head coach, Andrew Gaze, and Mike McCagnon. And there's a lot of head scratching going on because they had fired head coach Todd Bowles right after the season. And many speculated, why would they not fire the general manager? Because traditionally, the general manager wants to hire their own coach. Don't know how much McCagnon was involved in hiring Gaze, but it doesn't matter now because he's out of a job.
Right. And let me just chime in on the NBA playoff teams. Right now, Golden State Warriors lead the Portland Trail Blazers 3-0. And the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Toronto Raptors, which they play their 3rd game this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Milwaukee leads that series 2-0. A lot of people, Bobby and team here, is looking at Golden State Warriors against Milwaukee.
Well,
These
listen,
have been the dominant teams this year.
Listen, when Kevin Durant got injured in the previous series, Golden State has they're putting on a show, and they're looking like the Golden State Warriors that won a championship before Kevin Durant would be in there.
Yes.
There's a lot of ball movement. It's not to take anything away from Kevin Durant, but it's actually enjoyable. It was enjoyable with Kevin Durant. It's even more enjoyable watching Golden State right now. They were down 13 at the half. They came out in the 3rd quarter.
They
and
are
just
amazing
put a
in the
beating,
second half.
Put
in all
a
of the
beating
games.
on Portland.
Yes, they did. So there we go, folks.
Speaking of beatings,
Oh, Deontay Wilder.
Deontay Wilder last night, 2 minutes 17 seconds. Bam!
Right hand, and just crushed his opponent in the ring last night. Brazil. So
What was the weight class?
heavyweight.
Heavyweight.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
Yep.
17 seconds.
Yep.
Right, there you go.
What was the purse?
Well, it's for a championship, so I don't know how much the loser got, but he did well because he didn't have to fight for long. He was going to the first round.
Well, I want to say by being on our YouTube channel, and I think going forward we will remain on YouTube.
Tell a friend.
Tell a friend.
Tell everybody.
Everybody. And I want to thank everybody. For the next 2 weeks, we will be off due for the Memorial holiday next weekend. And then the following weekend is our sister station, Hot 97 Summer Jam. So we all will be out in New Jersey partying and having a good time.
Not all of us.
So we're off for
weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So anything else within a minute?
Just to close out, just like we talked about mental health
Yes.
and wellness, and I just want to just add to what Achilles said, right? The amount of political stress that is going on in the world, and what Nitha said about social media. Social media allows people to live their lives out loud.
Yes.
And when you live your life out loud, you're subjected to things that you may not know how to cope with. Right. So if you are feeling any kind of pressure or stress or anything, please find someone to talk to. Because if you keep it in, and this is where I disagree with something you said earlier, Fatim, about, just telling somebody, tough it out. You can tell them that after you take time to listen to them. If you don't take time to listen to them, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not being supportive to that person.
The point I was making, that it wasn't a point for me. I was using a point.
You were making
that,
a generational point.
Generational point that exactly that the older generation would tell me. My father told me. My mother told me. My aunt told me. My cousins told me. Yo, stand up. You know how we use the word, and forbid me because we don't use this word no more. But you're a punk or you're a faggot if you don't stand up. So that's the point I was trying to make.
And putting labels
not my
does not
opinion
help.
at the end of the day.
Right.
So so
we
that's.
use that word, but
I'm just saying that's
but
we
your
should
point.
the
But
point.
then
But
what
I'm
ends
just saying.
up happening though is that those folks then pass that on to the younger generation, and that trauma gets passed on, which we talked about, because they never got the help that they needed to.
And
that's why I give
each
the younger generation
other,
props.
love each other through compassion, show your love by listening before you speak, and embrace people's pain.
Yeah. And one thing Bobby said, you know what felt so good the other day? I was traveling from the station.
I thought we were done.
And yeah, we are doing my point. We were traveling from the radio. I was traveling from the radio station, and I took my cell phone and put it in my bag.
Felt
and,
good,
and
didn't
it
you?
felt so good that
Right.
I'm not doing this every minute. And I read a book. I was reading a book, and I took the train home instead of driving, and I just got into me, and it felt so good.
Doesn't it feel good?
It feels
My favorite
great.
thing is getting on a plane and turning off my phone.
Turning it off.
Best time.
Well, that's it, folks.
And as Bob would always say,
Get your mind right.
get your mind right
And have a good
keep
thought.
a good thought. And keep a good thought.
All right. God bless you.
God bless everybody.
2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.